What's up my friends, welcome back to the channel. Today we're gonna make a deep dive into the world of milk clarification. I've been using the exact same method for the past 10 years, so I thought it was the time I verify if I was making it right or if I could improve my technique. So I spent the whole week clarifying the same cocktail and I am ready to share my results with you, which are not exactly what I expected, which is a great thing. That means that we will learn something new. So before we start, if you're new here, welcome. Subscribe if you're not already, and let's go clarify some cocktails. Let's go. Alright my friends, so before we dive deep into the topic today, I wanted to take a quick moment to address a little something. I don't know if you noticed, but I skipped a couple of uploading weeks lately, like 2 or 3 in the past 2 months. There's a couple of reasons for that. One of the reasons I've been working really hard on other projects, which I will be able to reveal eventually. And the other reason is when I make videos like this one today, I have to shoot the B-roll across several different days. Like it took me 5 days to shoot the B-roll for all my clarified cocktails this week, to gather all the information I needed, and that plus the A-roll I'm shooting right now, shooting the thumbnail, editing the video, plus all that mixed with my other projects that I have to take care of. It was just impossible for me to post a video the same week I started shooting it. And because I also have other projects like this, other ideas of videos that I want to make that will require a longer period of production, it might happen here and there this year, but hopefully that's just to make better videos for you. But this leads me to talk also about the Patreon, because there every month I share a cocktail ebook that gathers all the recipes that I shared on the channel the month before. So if there's less videos, you might think that the ebook will be thinner, but that's not the case. I will make sure that even if I upload less videos, the ebook will remain interesting for you. So it might include some exclusive recipes or recipes from the Instagram, but either ways, I will make sure that the ebook will be very interesting no matter what. So if you're a member of the Patreon already, thank you very much, and don't worry, it will remain interesting. And if you're not a member yet and want to support the channel, well, that would be greatly appreciated. All the information will be in the description below, like always. But now let's talk about our topic today, and let's deep dive into the milk clarification. So like I said in the intro, I've been using the exact same method for the past 10 years to milk wash my cocktails. And it's pouring the cocktail over the milk with a 25% ratio milk to cocktail and filtering the cocktail right away through one layer of coffee filter. So to understand why I've been making it that way, we need to rewind a little bit and understand what is milk clarification and what it does. The idea behind this is to incorporate some milk into a cocktail that usually has some acidity. When you lower the pH of milk with acidity, it immediately starts to curdle. And when it curdles, it traps some of the tannins, it smoothens the rough edges of the acidity, and also mellow the burn of the alcohol. One more thing is, when milk curdles, that means that it separates its fat from its protein, the fat being the curds and the protein being the whey, which will be released in the cocktail, while the curds will be left behind with all the impurities. So the result is a cocktail completely different, super smooth and round with a silky texture that's added by the whey. The whey also has a very subtle but distinctive taste that's super typical to clarified milk punch, and it's very enjoyable. There's also some other side effects to this process, one being very cool, it extends the shelf life drastically of your cocktail. If you keep your clarified milk punch in pasteurized bottle, you can keep it for years. Also, it's gonna make your cocktail look pretty badass, it's gonna make them clear, but keep in mind, clear doesn't mean colorless. If you use an ingredient that has an intense color, you're gonna find it back in the clarified cocktail, but it's gonna be clear. So now that we all understand the fundamentals of milk washing, I can tell you why I was making it, the way I was making it, and why I tried different things to see if I could improve my technique. First, I've always poured my cocktail over the milk and not the other way around for one specific reason I was told was very important when I started making this. It's because when you do it that way, every single drop of your cocktail will be in contact with uncurdled milk. So that's gonna leave more chance to the milk to trap everything that needs to be trapped equally in the whole cold cocktail. But when you pour the milk over the cocktail, it starts to curdle right away before it got in contact with all the drink. So that means that some part of the cocktail might not be as impacted by the clarification process, resulting in a less impactful method. So that's the first thing I'm gonna test today, a side-by-side comparison between the cocktail over the milk and the milk over the cocktail, and see what differences it makes, if it makes any. Second, and contrary to what most of the old classic clarified cocktail recipe asked for, I didn't feel the need to wait before starting the filtration because the curdling process happens very fast. But then I started to wonder if it would make a difference in terms of the taste if the cocktail was remaining in contact with the milk for a longer period of time. So that's the second thing that we're gonna test, if it makes a difference if we wait or not before we start the filtration. Then I always used roughly a 25% milk to cocktail ratio when I was making my clarification. That's the ratio I was told to use when I started making this. I always got great result with that, and also I thought that the flavor was spot on. But then I started to wonder how the quantity of milk would impact the whole process. So that's the third thing I tested this week. Also, time is a very important data when it comes to milk quash cocktails because let's face it, it's very time consuming, so we're gonna talk about this as well. What's my favorite setup and a couple of tips and tricks to make it as fast as possible. So now the test and the results. So I made the exact same cocktail for all the tests, a whiskey sour following the 2-1-1 template that just makes it super easy for all the calculations for the milk, or if I wanted to make a smaller or a bigger batch. And also I thought it would be a great idea to use an aged spirit in the cocktail to see how the milk clarification will impact the aging notes of the spirit after the clarification. So for the first one, as I said, I went with the whiskey sour with a 25% milk to cocktail ratio, and on one side I poured the cocktail over the milk, and on the other one the milk over the cocktail. I left the cocktails resting at room temperature for 30 minutes before starting the filtration, and I used a single layer of coffee filter. Like always, you leave that running until you see the liquids dripping is clear, and then you switch vessel, re-pour the cloudy liquid over the unfiltered mixture, and then you leave it running all the way through. So I ran this test twice just to make sure I didn't make any mistakes in the first one, because I wanted to use this kind of as a benchmark for the other ones. And looking at my notes just to make sure, the first batch, the milk over the cocktail with 120 ml of cocktail and 30 ml of milk yielded 100 ml of clarified drink, and the cocktail over the milk yielded 110 ml of clarified cocktail. So this was kind of aligned with what I thought would happen, because I was always told to do the cocktail over the milk method to get a better result. But then when I redid the test the second time, the milk over the cocktail yielded 105 ml and the cocktail over the milk yielded 100 ml. So I guess it has to do a little bit with the fact that depending on how the curds set at the bottom of your filter, it can make a filter that's heavier to pass through, and over time it can yield a little bit more or a little bit less. The difference is so little, I think we can conclude that pouring the cocktail over the milk or the other way around for the yield doesn't make a difference. That being said, both batches made by pouring the cocktail over the milk yielded something that was slightly clearer. So even though it's not a clear winner, I used this method for the following tests. So here we have another whiskey sour with a 25% milk to cocktail ratio, with the cocktail poured over the milk and left resting in the fridge for 12 hours. As you can see, after 12 hours, the separation between the solids and the liquid is very clear. So I was thinking I would actually get a better yield out of this one, but it only yielded 90 ml. So unless this one wins the taste test that we're gonna make later, there's absolutely no reason to leave your milk pouch resting for a long period of time before filtering it. So now let's talk about the results with the different milk quantities. So here, to test the impact of the milk quantity in the milk clarification, I used on one side 12.5% milk to cocktail ratio, and on the other one 37.5% milk to cocktail ratio. And this is when it got really interesting. The 12.5% milk to cocktail ratio wouldn't curdle at all. It was always dripping cloudy. There was nothing to do with this one, so we can clearly say that using too little milk will not work at all. On the other hand, using a little more milk yielded the biggest batch that we've done so far, 120 mils. But given the fact that we also used more milk, that alone doesn't tell me that this is the way to go. But what's gonna follow is the biggest discovery that I've made throughout this whole process. All the batches that I've made took a long time to filter. Even one took 12 hours, but this one in 2.5 hours was fully filtered. That means that if it passes the taste test, I will move on to this milk ratio for my milk clarification. Speaking of time, before we move on to the taste test, let's talk about my favorite and fastest rig to make the filtration. 99% of the time, people will tell you to use a couple of layers of cheesecloth or coffee filter for your filtration. And while this works, it has its flaws. The curds are going to settle at the bottom of your filter, making one single thick filtration bed, and it's gonna slow down the process by a lot. So I came to the conclusion that by adding on top of my coffee filter or cheesecloth one large nylon nut milk bag, it's gonna make kind of a double filtration device, and it's gonna work much better. Because of the fabric of the nut milk bag, it's not gonna set perfectly on top of the coffee filter or cheesecloth, so it's kind of gonna make an air pocket in between. So the nut milk bag is going to gather most of the curds to make a first filtration bed, but it's also gonna let pass through it some of the solids, making a second filtration bed on the coffee filter or cheesecloth, but much thinner. So because both filtration beds are thinner, the liquid passes through it faster, but because it passes through overall as much solids as if it was just one filtration bed, but a thick one, the process is gonna be as efficient, just faster. So here as an example, I made 2 batches of 400 ml of cocktail, on one side with just a coffee filter, on the other one with a coffee filter and a nut milk bag, and the batch with the nut milk bag filtered 2 times faster than the one without it. I also think it is very interesting and important to point out that this bigger batch gave me a much better yield. This was 400 ml of cocktail with a 37.5% milk to cocktail ratio, and I got 85% yield in comparison to the single serve that gave me 76% yield with the exact same percentage of milk to cocktail ratio. So I think it is safe to say that the bigger the batch, the less cocktail you're gonna lose in the filtration. But now with all that being said, we need to make the taste test because let's face it, it all comes down to that. There's absolutely no point of making it faster or to get better yield if it doesn't taste good. So let's see which one of the clarified cocktail tastes the best. So we have our 4 contendants here. We have the cocktail over the milk with 25% milk to cocktail ratio, the milk over the cocktail with a 25% milk to cocktail ratio, cocktail over the milk with 37.5 milk to cocktail ratio. These 3 were filtered after 30 minutes. And the last one is the cocktail over milk with 25% milk to cocktail ratio, rested overnight in the fridge. So let's talk about them. The first one for me had a strong sweet tart candy-like flavor profile with really tapered down wood and aging notes while still being a little bit present, a very pleasant velvety texture, and a way aftertaste lingering in the back palate. The second for me was quite surprising, but not in a good way. The flavor of the spirit in this case is much more muted than in the first one, but the acidity is not as rounded, it's actually quite sharp. The long whey finish that we had in the first one is almost not there. So overall, if we compare these two, the filtration times were almost identical, the yields were almost identical as well, but the taste is much better in the one with the cocktail poured over the milk. Now let's talk about this one that has a little bit more milk, that had a better yield and a much faster filtration time. I definitely picked up more texture from the whey and also a little bit more flavor from it. The aging notes and tannins are muted as well, like in the first one, but still present, but the acidity is much rounder and it just feels more balanced. So for me, this one is the clear winner so far. But we still have this one to talk about, the one that spent 12 hours in the fridge. And who knows, maybe the fact that the cocktail spent so much time with the milk, we're gonna get a better flavor. Maybe it's gonna take over a third one. Let's see. Well, actually the flavors in this one were much more stripped down and the acidity was much sharper, which was very surprising and once again, not so much in a good way. So for me, we have a clear winner in terms of taste and it's the same one that won it all across all tests. It was a better yield, it was faster, and it just tastes better. Is the one with the cocktail over the milk with a 37.5 milk to cocktail ratio. Hands down the best one, and I don't know if you can see it, but it's the one that has the best color as well. That's the one that's the clearest. It's really the best looking cocktail, the tastiest, and the most efficient method. So my friends, this sums it all for today's episode. I hope you liked it. Leave a thumbs up if you did. And if you want to know more about all this, I'm going to put everything down, all my thought process, some more tips and tricks for better clarification. So make sure to subscribe to the Patreon if you're not already. The link is going to be in the description below. So my friends, this is it for me today. Thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe before you go, to turn that bell if you want to make sure not to miss the next one. Until then, thank you very much again. Have a great day and see you very soon. Cheers. That's crazy, the difference. This one is truly the best. I'm gonna pour them all in the same bottle though, but next time, I'm gonna use this method.